Thank you, Slavki. So, as we have officially switched to English, welcome everyone and welcome to yet another meetup organized by Symphony. We're really happy that we have participants from 8 countries tonight, which, as Slavica has already mentioned, is something that has become a tradition for us. As the pandemic has started, we have joined forces from all our development hubs, and tonight we have a speaker from our Skopje hub. So later on, the spotlight will be directed to Mario Rajcik from our Skopje hub. He's a software developer with who has been focused on front-end development for the last 2.5 years. I'm Marian. Hello from my side as well. I'm community manager in our Skopje hub, and I'll be your host tonight together with my colleague Slavica, who is our community manager in our Belgrade hub. Slavki will say hello shortly and introduce herself. I would like just to share information that throughout November, we have been focused on front-end technologies in all our educational and knowledge sharing activities in Symfony. And it's kind of logical to wrap up this month with an external meetup where we can follow that same pattern and share interesting insights, hints, and recommendations with our external communities as well. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Without further ado, I'm leaving Slavki to give you some more information about what will be happening tonight, and later on, of course, all eyes on Mario.
Yeah, thank you very much for amazing introduction, Marian. I will not take a lot of your time. I think that Mario is giving us more value tonight and he's sharing his knowledge. I will just go with you through our agenda, or actually what is waiting for you tonight. Basically some ground rules, let's say like that. Okay, after my introduction, Mario is taking the stage and he will give us the presentation. Pay a lot of attention to his presentation. As I already mentioned, we will have a Kahoot quiz at the end, and there will be, I think, 10 questions. And if you are fast enough and if you paid a lot of attention to Mario's presentation, you can win some amazing prizes. One important thing regarding our presentation, because our meetups are like knowledge sharing sessions and it's not one-sided, so we want to encourage you to share your knowledge with us. So use the Q&A section. You can ask questions during the presentation in our chat box, but also you have, for more complex questions, please use our Q&A section at the end. You will see at the bottom Q&A part in Zoom. So if you have some complex question regarding the topic, please type it there. Also, if you want to discuss the topic with Mario live, in one-on-one, let's say like that, you can raise the hand and we can unmute you so you can share your impressions or just discuss the topic with Mario. So I really want to encourage you to do that, because we appreciate that, because this is not something like we want to learn something new, but we want to get something from everyone here. So I will not take a lot of your time anymore. Pay attention, ask questions, and let's play a game at the end. And that's it for me. Mario, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Slavica. Thank you. Symphony team has been great help and aiding me throughout this whole process of my first meetup. So I would like to thank them first. I want to welcome everybody to joining us on this Zoom call with a meetup. And before we begin, I would like to advise everybody to grab a glass of water. It's going to be pretty important later down the road. I already have mine, so I don't want to be alone. And so yeah, let's start. Today's talk is Bulletproof React and Redux, or rather navigating the open sea of choices, because we know choices are hard. So I figured that's going to be a great thing to share my knowledge on. First, I want to talk a bit about myself. Who am I? I've been a developer for the past 2.5 years with the biggest focus on front-end development, mostly working with React and micro frontends. I've joined the Symphony team for the past almost a year now. And what I like to do in free time is actually lately I've been reading a lot of source codes of my packages, which is sort of like the motivation to doing this talk today. So who is this talk aimed at? So who can benefit from this talk? Of course, everybody that's beginner in front-end development. This is going to be a bit of an information overload, but I'm going to try to make it interesting for everybody and basically try to explain it as simple as possible. Devs coming from other frameworks and libraries. JavaScript is such a different language that its frameworks can be quite different. So for example, Angular and Vue, they have such a different patterns, etc. So uh, if you're coming to React from one of those frameworks, this is going to be a great time for you. Backend developers. So I know backend developers don't really like us too much. JavaScript, not the biggest serious language. But if you're joining us and you want to be full stack, this is sorry, but the path that you must take. And everybody that's interested in improving their front-end skills, so mid or senior or just curious, and that kind of leaves us with everybody that's not a non-tech colleague, or rather everybody that's been supporting us to have an insight about what kind of problems as we as developers face. So I spoke about motivation a little bit, and I'm going to explain why, or rather my intrinsic motivation. I'd like to re-explain some things that I've understood throughout my whole development experience, and I try to explain them as simply as I can, because what I've gathered is that not all tutorials or explanations are created equally. Sometimes when I've been learning, the learning process involved me getting up to the 10th page of Google to find that specific blog post or a video that kind of really brings the information up for me, and the only way to understand that. So I'm gonna try and hopefully succeed at doing that today with you guys as well. And the other motivation is basically JavaScript is being so fast to increment these past few years, and with that comes a lot of different ways to handle certain things, and it's just completely different language from the past 10 years. If it exists, there's probably a JavaScript version of it, and we as developers really have to roll with the flow and see how everything goes. So that being said, what do you think that's next? What's going to be the next big thing, right? So we've had solid, we have clean architecture, we have the whole React lifecycle, we have flux patterns, we have higher order components, hooks, functional programming. It's sometimes it's hard to keep up, but what I'm gonna try to do today is bring everybody to a thinking state, to try it and guess, or put themselves in a place where they can innovate and move everything forward, or break the status quo. So a big part of our job is using the right tool for the right job. Of course, we cannot just use everything. If we have if we only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everybody knows that saying, and that is quite apparent in the JavaScript world, considering npm has been rising in amounts of packages. I couldn't find the latest information for 2020, but June 2019, npm broke its millionth package. That's a million different choices that you can do, or other million mistakes than one can make, is how we usually perceive those things. So what does this do from a front-end developer's perspective? Well, this is called the paradox of choice, or rather, in our circles, it's known as JavaScript fatigue. The more choices can be overwhelming, so it requires a lot of work to think. While it seems that we have more diverse menu, all of those choices can do exactly the opposite. So we want to sort of narrow down some of these choices and learn today how we can navigate those choices. The answer is kind of a cop out, a political statement rather. It depends. Well, of course, we can answer everything with it depends, but what does actually depend on? Now, the way that we usually do this in my experience is we kind of focus on size, we focus on dependencies, we focus on popularity, so stars, etc. And one super great tool that I've been using lately, it's called Bundle Phobia. It's this website where you can just paste the name of any package and you're gonna get everything up front. You know the versioning, you know how the size changed, you know how much time is gonna take the client to download that package. So it kind of brings you up to speed with certain things. Now, this EC even is not actually a great idea of a package. It has like 10 dependencies, and it only returns whether or not the number given is even. So things like this should be kind of avoided as much as possible. The other tool that I've been using is called npm trends. This is a pretty cool tool where it actually even gives you alternative packages to what you've typed in, which can be very good way to increase, looking at other packages and things that are not as maybe as popular. And I want to just bring the focus down to the is number package. It's kind of hilarious that a package that returns the true if a number is actually a finite number has been downloaded 38 million times this past week. Yes, that's a real number. Yes, those numbers are up to date. It's like I just made that screenshot yesterday. So this really gives a perspective of how much of package developers have we been becoming. And if anybody just looked at the source code, we probably realize that we don't need that package. Um, so this brings us to the standards versus flexibility idea of when you're choosing down the road which type of package to use. One would tend to gravitate towards the most popular one that is sort of becoming a standard, but at the same time, not every square peg goes into a round hole. So you need to be flexible and try to evaluate what actually should you be using. Like, for example, if this was backend development and you're using just a regular SQL database and you have all of these nodes, maybe you want a graph database, right? So this is the process that I've been using. And Agile actually helped us a lot to make these decisions. The way that Agile and Scrum works, everybody knows, we have these small time frames where we can design, develop, test, and deploy. And this basically allows us to iterate fast and fail even faster. And failing fast is actually a great thing because you're not throwing away a lot of work. You're only throwing away a week's or 2 weeks work, depending on how we split our time. So it allows us to validate our ideas, and then maybe we can iterate and improve upon them, which is basically the way to handle these types of things. If you need to develop a feature, if the client wants something to be done, you probably want to optimize for delivery to bring as much as value to the client and to validate some of those ideas even further. And if those prove to be great, then later down the road, you're going to have some time to actually maybe simplify the process, maybe change some dependency with another one that's lighter, that's better, that's faster, or maybe you run something on your own. But the point is, uh, having all those choices, you would rather just have one that's going to bring you 80% of the way with 20% of the work. And yeah, I mentioned optimization later down the road, but you really kind of have to allocate specifically time for optimization. This happens all the time. We write our to-dos, we say, okay, we need to maybe improve upon this, but the client just roll out even more features, asks for more features. We really have to plan in advance when are we gonna do these things. So if you need to drop a dependency, favor of a hand roll solution, and of course, just having tests. So every time that you do swap a dependency, your test's gonna break. And yeah, this is probably the way to do this. Um, yeah, this is why I mentioned this. We have a water break right now. I'm gonna take a sip of water. I encourage you to do so as well. And we're gonna go next with state management. Give me 15 seconds. you really have to kind of imagine the elevator music. I wasn't prepared for that. I kind of put it in there.
I'm in hub, Mario. Maybe you can listen to mine. I don't know if you can hear it.
Yeah, I maybe I should have prepared something in the background. Even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that we've had our water break, we're gonna talk about state management, because state management is the biggest thing, second thing after choosing your main package. Like if you're using React to handle your complexities of your front end development, and I believe that. Um your web app is going to be as good as your state management is. Of course, React comes with its own state management, basically use state or regular state. Not that doesn't have to be hooks, is how state is being managed in React. But we all know the pains of it because, well, if you want to share state, you are now suddenly having the problems of props drilling and whether or not something should be in the child component or the parent component. And of course, after a while, React evolved, and we now have the context, React context. But however, context is still, not the best. And let's kind of see maybe why is that the case. So, what's wrong with context? We have this. I have this demo here that's showing us how a regular context could be used. So we have the context provider, we have some use state that we want to share, some actions that kind of change the state, and we have the values. Values are being passed to the provider, and over here we don't kind of consume that state. We wrap everything in the provider. We have our components, and what do you think is going to happen when we click, for example, the increment or the decrement button? So one would assume that only things that are changed is going to trigger a re-render. However, that with context is not proving to be the case. Even because decrement is only subscribed to the decrement portion of the context, it's still gonna trigger a re-render. And the naive approach of this or fixing this is just using memoization, right? So we have this cached value, and we don't have we compare the previous and the next value, and we see whether or not something should be executed at all. And yeah, let's try using use memo. So the way we use memo, we just have this callback here that we put everything in the same way that previously we had it. And in the dependency tree, we have everything that's changing, which is count and hello. So only when those things change, these things should be changed. Everything should be cached and memoized. However, yeah, no dice, sorry. Context is just built that way, and this is rather unfortunate, but this is how context works. Context isn't built for global state usage. It's built for minor usages and or something. If you're like a package developer and you want to share this component has some couple of nested components inside, and you don't want a props drill. This is perfect situation for you. Or if this is a tiny app, that's fine. But as we all know, every tiny web app kind of matures and grows and it has better needs. So one would say probably that you want to start with something simple like context and then maybe swap it. But given that Redux is such a simple thing to use, that I don't even think that's really the best way to go. And having everything in context is kind of re-rendering every single thing in the children from the children components, and that's going to be a death by a thousand cuts. So uh, let's talk about the obvious choice. Let's talk about Redux a little bit. Oh, before that, I forgot to mention. Do you remember Callback Hell? So before async await and before promises, we used to have to pass these callbacks all around to have a synchronous nature of executing in JavaScript. Well, one idea to optimize context that I've been hearing by people that use it is, well, you can have multiple contexts, right? And then you have this component that kind of depends on 5 or 6 contexts. Well, we're back in 2010. We have again the same callback hell, but now it's just nested providers. We really don't want to do that. This is triggering so many renders across the board. That is just not the best idea. and spoke a bit about Redux. We all know this chart. Everybody that's been learning Redux and Googled how does Redux work, there's 50 different versions of this chart. I have it here just for reference, but the idea is this is a simplifying graphical representation of how Redux work. But have you ever guys actually tried to make your own Redux? Where I'm not gonna do live coding. I promised myself I wouldn't do that. But I do have an explanation or an example that we can show, which is this. So as you can see on this left-hand side, we only have 16 lines of code, including white space. And we already have something that is like 90% there of what vanilla Redux does. We have a function that creates store, takes a reducer, returns initial state, it takes an initial state. If the state is initial state, we can pass there. We just have two methods, the get state and the dispatch. The get state is as simple as it can get. We are just mutating a scoped value. And the dispatch is just mutating it again, but through a reducer. Reducer just gonna work exactly how it's gonna work on regular Redux. And yeah, you can see here by the console logs that everything's working properly. So what's the point of this? Why are we recreating something that's already been done? Why would we recreate Redux? The main motivation behind this is I want to show everyone that your packages don't have to be black magic. They have code behind it, and most of the time it's quite simple. On large packages, of course, it's super complex, but you can still scope out some of those things and try to figure them out, and maybe sometimes roll your own just for educational purposes. And after this, I wanted to actually go take this a step further. Or rather, Redux is just a vanilla package. It can be used by any front-end framework. So I thought, why actually not try it with React as it's usually used? So Redux doesn't come with its own React bindings. That's why we installed the React Redux package. And yep, this is basically how it looks now. So I have only upgraded it a little bit. We now have a set of subscribers. Sets are pretty cool, by the way, if you've been reading into the new year's JavaScript features. Sets are like arrays, but they don't allow duplicate items, so half work done for you. And it has these great methods that you don't really have to iterate them through to add and delete to them. We now have just a regular function that's called update that is just triggering the re-render for every subscriber. We're going to explain how the re-render would work. It's actually quite primitive. We have the get state by selector function. This is not being exposed, but it's only for internal purposes. This is think use selector, you pass it a callback function, and it just returns that piece slice of state, right? Dispatch is the same as it before. We now have a subscribe. So subscribe just adds your force re-render function to the subscriber list. So every component that's going to subscribe to the state, it's going to get a re-render. And we're just returning a method to, be able to unsubscribe, because you don't want to update state for components that are no longer subscribed or in the tree in the DOM. And this is basically where the magic happens. These are just two custom hooks. So custom hooks, actually, by the way, according to the documentation, are just regular plain old functions that start with the use keyword. So if you were to make this function be called create selector, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because it's going to say use state cannot be used outside of other hooks or yada, yada, yada. Rules of hooks, it's super complicated, but I would definitely advise you to read about it. It's nothing unlike any type of thing in programming languages. But if we just append the prefix of use, we now have a hook. So use selector has this use state. Default value is a regular object. And in the use effect here on mount, when the selector is going to be used, we are going to create a function that's called force update. So force update, when being called with the exact same value, so another object, because JavaScript works by reference by equality by reference instead of equality by value, it's still going to trigger a render. So even if this was like an incrementing number or something more complex, it's still gonna work. But just regular plain old objects are gonna trigger the re-render, and we get back the unsubscribe method by getting the subscribe method. Of course, as we saw over here, subscribing is just gonna delete our current component from the subscribers list, or rather our current force update for that particular component. And we just return the selector function. So use selector, if we were to be using this, is gonna work exactly like the same as the Redux, React Redux package use selector. And use dispatch is even simpler. There's not much else to discuss about it. So again, the point of this exercise is to try to remove that stigma of the complexity behind your tools, and to encourage you, because I believe that everybody can contribute to the open source scene, and just by getting and demystifying some of these features. So okay, we talked about context, we talked about Redux, those are the most obvious choices, but something that's very missing in these packages is how would you handle asynchronous actions. React doesn't come with state managements yet again, yet a lot asynchronous actions. So have you guys ever tried to look into how the Redux Tongue package, which is the most popular Tongue asynchronous Redux middleware used? So I'm gonna spoil the fun. I'm gonna show it to you now. Be prepared, because it's only 14 lines. 14 lines with white space and non-minification, is being downloaded 2.4 million times this week. And the biggest web applications are relying on this. These 14 lines that everybody just installs and never thinks twice about it. Again, I'm being a bit of reiterative, but the simplicity behind some of these packages is astounding to me. And once you start reading code, you're going to see there is really no magic behind it. I'm really hoping that you're looking at source code makes you as excited as I am, but for me, this has been eye-opening when I started doing this. So I hope you have the same impression as well. The other asynchronous availability or option out there is sagas, and I've heard everything about sagas, most that they are super complex. I would like to, break the ice a little bit and just show you how simple they can be. There's really no magic behind them. They do seem a little bit weird with the syntax and everything, but yeah, we're gonna dispel that right now. So at the bottom here, we have the root saga. Think like root reducer. You remember how you would do combined reducers on your creating the store. When you're creating the store, you have these combined reducers. You just have a reducer over there, and yeah, bada bing, bada boom, it kind of works. It's basically the same setup for sagas. You have a basic root saga, and you have all these forks. Now, I don't want to go too deep in what forks do, but you're basically handling those asynchronous calls with each fork. It's kind of self-explanatory by the name of it. And what do we actually fork? Where we fork these root sagas that are basic sagas for well, you can split them however you want, but I usually split them by feature. So if we have a feature called sum, it's kind of basic placeholder name, but roll with it. We would have this watcher function. So this watcher function basically is a regular listener, I would say, that is handling some types. So this here is going to listen to the type called some type. And every time that this goes through the Redux, it's going to call our saga. That's basically it. Now, that's going to call this function, or rather function generator. That's where the star here is for. So function generators are basically the primitive for every asynchronous async await function or promises. Everything gets actually transpiled to function generators. And the main difference is that they can be canceled. That's like the biggest plus for function generators. If you start an async await function, it's gonna roll until basically it finishes. You cannot cancel it. Generators, on the other hand, you can cancel. That's one. And two is instead of using the await keyword, we now use the yield keyword, but just mentally you can swap those out and never think of yield again. It's doing basically the same thing. Um, I have this cool way that I kind of import everything. It's kind of bad for lazy loading, but given that Redux kind of have to go into a whole package in the first chunk, doesn't really matter that much. Um, and in this example, I just have the payload. So every time that we call an action and we see the type, it basically acts as a listener. It triggers this function. This function is gonna execute, and we kind of handle everything programmatically here. We call our success, we call our failure, we can parse everything, and they're super easy to test as well. So I really don't understand the fear behind people saying Redux Saga is overkill. I believe it can speed up development a lot. It's way easier to read and super easy to use. So I encourage you to check it out sometimes. Um, Another problem that I've seen people do a lot of the time when they try to have state that's in theory derived, but never they think about it in that particular direction. So in this example here, we have just a regular component that has a state, which it's a basic counter example. And if we want to get the count times two, like for example, we wanted to always have the double count for some reason, it doesn't matter what it is. People I've seen do this, they just have use state again, and they kind of get how use effect works. So props for that. It really does work like this. Every time your count is changed, we set the double count to count out two, to count times two. But why would you go through a whole throughout this whole process of synchronizing everything? Today we have counted double count, but tomorrow if we have 5 more derived states, you're gonna have to sync everything, and it's gonna have so much problems. And that this is mainly rooted behind people not understanding how the render process works, and that when one of the value changes, everything needs to be reevaluated, whether we like it or not. That's why there's memoization as a optimization practice. So basically just doing double count as a derived value from count. So every time count changes, count is going to be recalculated to double count, and you're just throwing away so much code, and everything's cleaner and less prone to errors. And this doesn't just work for regular local state. This also works for example, selector state coming from Redux. If you have a use selector that has some derived value, you can just put it in a constant, everything's great. An even better solution, if the derived state should be should be shared between components, just create a custom hook. We talked about custom hooks like a minute ago. They're super easy to create. Just slap on the use keyword in the beginning. You can now call hooks inside your function and just return your new function. You can even actually use memoization right at this point, and everything's gonna be even more optimized. However, don't really pre-optimize too early. But if you were to do that, I wouldn't even do it by foot like this. If you want to do memoization, there are packages for it, and I advise everybody to take a look into the Reselect package. Now, Reselect is a very cool tool for Redux and mainly around memoization of selectors, and not just memoization, but rather composition. And we all know that composition is super great for keeping your code dry and not repeating yourself. If you have this super cool place that we can keep all their selectors and everything's memoized and everything makes total sense, it's just a win in my book. Like there is zero logic to not use it. It's only 800 bytes when minified and gzipped, so it's an easy win. To give a short example of how actually this code here works, this is how we would usually just write regular selectors. It's just a callback function that returns a certain state slice. I would rather optimize this to have a way to maybe shop is undefined, but we're gonna later look into that. And we just call the create selector function. We pass in our dependencies. So this can take as many arguments as possible. You can just have 10 dependencies here. The last one is always going to return us, it's going to take a callback function that returns us everything that's been selected before. So everything in the dependency tree in the same order, we're going to get it as arguments in our callback, and we can just have our logic here. This is pretty cool because now you can also test these functions in isolation, and your selectors are always going to be pretty decently tested and less prone to problems. Again, the same process is down the road, and everything is memoized. If we have this super long array here, and this is like 1,000 items, we don't want to filter or reduce through all of them each re-render if nothing actually changed. So selector is not going to rerun. It has its internal cache. It's going to return us the latest value. So yeah, the point is, don't prematurely optimize though. If you want to use a reselector and you want to use memoization, make sure you're actually benefiting from it. Do some tests, do some analysis, do some performance benchmarks, see if the efficacy is actually worth it. Maybe it's a super simple. Sometimes memoization can actually hurdle you instead of help you. So what if we don't even want to use Redux? Because I know this talks about React and Redux, but again, we're moving from the standards up to the flexibility type of side from this talk. And I want to offer some suggestions. I've made this list of a couple of them, and I've separated them by type, sort of. And I would advise that all of these are pretty good, and you should be looking at them. So if you have a super tiny application, but again, we already mentioned that context is not the best way to handle these types of things. You want to maybe have a super tiny store, and Unistore and Zustand can actually help you with that. Actually, everything by the Poimandres team that works behind Zustand has been pretty great. They actually wrote Use Spring as well. If you're doing React animation, you've probably heard of it. And they are only 400 and 700 bytes, respectively. And they already include asynchronous actions. So you don't need tongues, you don't need Redux. For 400 bytes, you could actually have a full-fledged global state management system, optimized to not re-render on some other prop changes, and it has synchronous actions inside. So I think it's just a straight up win in my book for tiny applications. If you want to maybe if you have sort of a unique problem, recall and xstate are pretty cool things to take a look at. So if Redux is SQL, these are going to be graph databases. Or rather, recall is almost exactly like graph because it actually has atoms. It works by the logic of atoms. So you know how we can have atomic state by using useState. So useState can sure hold complex values like this super big object tree or your state tree, but you would rather use it with regular primitives, numbers, strings, etc. And well, recall works sort of similar in a way that they can actually be initialized outside of your components. And this improves a lot of things. First of all, they can be shared because they are not living inside a component. If they're imported in other components, they can be shared. So you get shared state out of the box. And it has a lot of flexibility around that part with asynchronous actions as well. And it's actually developed by the Facebook team. So Facebook creates React. They're also maintainers of Redux, Tongues, etc. And now Recoil as well. Again, this is not supposed to replace Redux, but if you have certain issues with how Redux works, Recoil can be of great help here. Xstate, I'm only going to mention it a little bit because this is super mathematical approach to keeping state management, or rather finite state machines. So if anybody heard of finite state machines, is this very big state tree. When we say state in React, we really don't think of mathematical type of state because state can only go into other types of state. So think like a blinker when you're on the road. and you're at the crosswalk, you see the red light. Your red light can only go to green, green can go to yellow and back to red. So these types of states, when you have them and they're defined, there's less problems about going into unavailable state or state that should never happen. And we've had our problems before with that. I haven't we? So, and the third type of packages that I'm gonna mention are specialized tools for basically something that that is being a pain for every front-end developer, or rather having form state. All of these, well, when you select this country, now have these numbers, and when you have select this number, now you have to disable this or show these fields, and everything needs to be validated. So this handling everything in pure React or state or Redux is going to be super painful. So Formic is there to help you. It has everything that you would need to have a pretty cool form state. And the other option, which is quite newer, as you can see, March 6, 2019, is React Hook Form. The cool part about this is not only that it's way smaller than Formic, but it actually works with uncontrolled components. So when React works, we know that he wants to know everything, and he has this virtual DOM that keeps state everywhere. However, React Hook Form actually bypasses React completely. Now, some people might be iffy about it, and yeah, it comes with its own gotchas, but the performance benefit is huge, especially if you have like hundreds and hundreds of fields on a big on one screen. And the last part that I'm going to speak about, or rather mention, are these Redux-based wrappers and tools. So Easy Peasy is there to have everything that I've previously mentioned. Actually, it has thunks, it has synchronous actions through it, it has action creators, it has memorization built in, and it's actually Redux behind it. So it's Redux, it's everything, but everything set up for you, and it's super easy to use. Rematch Core is trying to do the same idea, but just slightly different, and it's quite smaller in size. But you can play with those and see what you like best. But the focus here a little bit is on Redux.js Toolkit, and I've been reading a lot about it lately. It's becoming the de facto standard for how to use Redux. We know that the main pain point when people discuss Redux is has so much boilerplate. You have to write your constants, you have to write your actions, you have to write your sagas or reducers and split everything, and it's just a mess with how much boilerplate. If you only wanna toggle a switch, but it should be kept in the global state. There's a lot of boilerplate. So Redux Toolkit is here to try and fix that. And because it's developed by the official React team, you would be kind of safer making that choice, because it's going to be maintained for a long period of time until React maybe dies or Redux dies. Who knows when that's going to happen? But at that point, you can always switch to anything else. So as you can see, it's kind of cool how it works. Creating a slice. So slices are basically how you would slice your state, or reducers. How we have a reducer for a feature, where this is creating a slice for that feature, and it's basically the same. The name is just having everything to be named. So when you're calling a function, you're calling an action, it can be prefixed, so you know which slice are we talking about. So it's just the slice name. It takes initial state, super self-explanatory. And then we have reducers, but this is kind of tricky because it's not actually reducers, but it kind of is. So I'm going to try and explain what does that mean. For example, we have this key value pair called user success, and it's actually taking a callback function, and it's being passed the state and action. So this is sort of how a reducer would work, but we're not saying on which type, and we're not even saying which action. So where is the action? Where are the types? Where is everything? Well, it doesn't need everything. Everything is generated in runtime. I know some of you, again, runtime, it's going to be slow, but it's proven to not be. So if speed of development is super important, this is just going to be a huge win. And there's something weird happening here that we're just assigning state. This is just, we're assigning new state to it, and we're expecting everything to be changed. But we've learned throughout our React development years that mutating is bad because, well, we need to do diffings, and it's easier to just replace the state and certain things like that. However, I'm gonna go into how does this work a bit later. This is basically the return. What does a slice have at the end of the day? As you can see now, it has actions. So we did not pass any actions, but we did get an action. It's the user success section. It's the named exactly the same. So name for the key is gonna be pretty crucial. And dispatching this would trigger exactly this reducer function. So it's kind of handling everything for you. And there's case reducers if you ever want to have this simple reducer function in a isolation to test it maybe, or things like that. And then if you ever want to have a middleware, maybe listen to a certain types, and you, like, where are the types, where are the constants, where are these things handled? Well, they're actually embedded. They're embedded in the action.type. Yes, this is a function, so it can be executed as a function, but it still has a property called type. So if you're not calling it as a function, it's going to return just a string with the type name. And yeah, let's go forward. I said I will mention how this works, and this is the slide about that. So I've looked into the code, and what do I see? Well, there's a lot of dependencies. That's the first fear that everybody does development's gonna notice. But one of the dependencies really caught my eye, and it's called Immer. And it's pretty cool because it actually allows you to write mutative code without actually mutating the object. It actually works by the copy on write mechanism. The basic idea is that you will apply all your changes to this temporary state, which is basically a proxy. So JavaScript proxies are pretty hot right now with ES 2020 and everything. And every time that the setter is being actually called, because this is just a regular setter in the backscenes, it's gonna change the base state. And returning over here, we have a copy, a new copy of the state. So nothing is actually mutated, but we can write code in a mutative manner. This is pretty neat if you have this super nested value, like if it's like 5 key value per 5 objects deep, and you would have to spread state, spread state.users, spread state.users.names, etc. Now you can just go to that, and this you can just select that function and value and change it. It's pretty easy. Yeah, I guess we reached our second water break, guys. So let's go to that.
Somehow, when I'm watching you, I need to drink my water, even though I'm not talking at all during the presentation.
maybe that's the science behind it. Maybe that's why I have it.
Yeah. You manipulated me into
Yeah.
this.
Super intentional, by the way. I'm taking credit. Okay, I've been talking a bit of time, and let's try to go rush forward. I want to mention a little bit about file structure because this is something that's been a pain point for everybody, and it's still a polarizing opinion, but we're gonna nail it down. The way I mentioned before is I like to structure my files based on features. So if you're coming from backend or you've been doing MVC all your life, you're gonna say, what is this now? Where is everything in one folder? However, this is gonna be super preferable for front end. Things like such as features can be, because we have don't repeat yourself standards with shareable components. This can be sort of like shareable features. If we want, we can just pluck this out, put it somewhere, it's still gonna work. That's pretty neat. You can even make it a package if you want to, version control it, etc. This is my preferred way of just doing constants. Super simple. I'm not gonna really go into that. Just have this prefix, and I'm using the string, the literal strings format. And I usually, when I do async actions, I have 3 actions or 3 types for each action, which is the success and failure. I mainly use these 2 words because I have a slight bit of OCD and they end up being exact same length. You can of course use any keywords there, but I'm kind of super cool about these 2 that I found those that are exact samely. Types, I'm importing types here. I'm creating just basic actions. I'm using again the literal, except this is an object, not a string this time, returning the type. And I always have payload. I don't have anything here meta or some weird structural values. It's easier when you know that the value is always going to be payload. You just can extract anything from payload. You don't want to have error here. I know some people in the failure actions have error here instead of payload, but just having payload is relieving that mental cognitivity that I need to wait. This is a failure. Wait, it's not payload. It's actually an error. The right payload every time is going to work every time. And again, this is where Emergence kind of goes in place. If you are to be using it instead of just using Redux toolkit, uh, this is as simple as it gets. It's so super simple. It's you can just implement it on pieces of your Redux code if you're already like half a year or months into development, or maybe even more, and you don't want to introduce new things. It can be introduced on just certain types of cases. Uh, this is a cool actually way that I'm handling loading and error states. Usually people just have this boolean called this loading, but it's not just gonna work for complex applications. So what I have is this object loading where I dynamically add values by type, and then I can fetch them because I know what they are. And I can have if is loading dot types this type, I can know that that certain asynchronous action is loading at the same time. I have the same approach for errors, and I believe this is going to be a game changer for everybody that's been trying to juggle all these loading and error states. Uh, this is the preferred way for me to use CSS. I really like CSS in JS. That's also a bit of a polarizing feature. People's coming from an older generation that been developers using just pure CSS and some organizational practices such as BEM. They really try to stay away from these types of things, but this is really in the nature and spirit of React. I can just pass props. If the prop is disabled, I'm gonna get a certain color. It also allows for composition. I can just import button here. It's gonna work just fine. And for me, the mental overhead and the speed of development and the avoiding of clashing of classes defeats the optimization part. And I can always just remove styled components and have all of these pre-rendered. Um, I already spoke about selectors, but yeah, they would live in the same feature folder for me. There's really nothing new about this except for maybe the loadish get. This is a tool or utility that I just cannot stop using. But now that we have ES6, we have this optional chaining where it kind of defeats this, but it's still gonna have to transpile to an older type of code if you have to support older browsers. So I'm used to this. Sagas we've already mentioned. This is basically a similar approach to what I've previously explained. And yeah, my next point would be don't instantly abstract your components. So I have this containers folder with the features. They can even be called features. My point is you can just separate everything by feature, but what would components have? Why wouldn't components have the header? Well, if the header lives in home and it's not shared anyway, don't rush to put it in components. It's not going to be reused. If it even is reused like second time, it still doesn't need to be abstracted. I would rather inline some certain things than abstract them early. Abstractions are way harder to follow than inline code. And yeah, there's a very cool talk about from Dan Abramov about this thing, and I really suggest everybody to take a look at that. It's kind of a bit of a play on words with the wet code base, because we already know don't repeat yourself with the dry code base, but point still stands. So where would we put our test files? Again, collocation is key, in my opinion. So just put your test files in the test folder where with the feature. You don't really need a tests folder outside in the source code just laying around there and having every single piece of test. It's really not an easy way to navigate your code, in my opinion. And yeah, again, for your nested features, nest tests even more. Now again, this may be a little bit nested, but with our modern IDEs and everything, it's only going to speed up your development. And having these expressive namings is going to help you navigation. Having home header.styles, home header.style.spec, you can easily just jump to any file that you want. So I want to slowly wrap up and bring up my first point of what's next. We have seen so many packages, so many different ways to handle these types of things, and we still are not settled in. Front end is not really like back end, where if you have 10 years of experience, you probably have 10 years of relevant experience. Everything is just almost set in stone. There are some innovations here and there, but if you're just doing basic REST and SQL still, there's little to go wrong, or options to choose, and they don't really care about folder structure, things and like that, and how is the API going to look and what package are we going to use. But we should really be thinking about that, and that's actually sort of, I want to be the water glasses half full type of guy, and think about all of these changes is actually allowing us to be innovative. If you were to be trying to be innovative in a backend world where everything is more stagnant, you're going to be dismissed instantly. But the front end community is quick to accept new and alternative ways of doing things, and I'm really optimistic about that part. And yeah, even though this talk is called Redux and React, I'm thinking, well, again, we don't want to be a tool developer. I am talking how to handle these types in React or in Redux, or what package should be used. Maybe it's not Redux though, but maybe it's not even React at all. We're gonna play a small game now, which is probably gonna be one-sided. Um, it's called Is This React? So I know it's kind of explaining itself in a question. However, let's look at the code. It has a counter component. We've seen 50 so far only in this talk, let alone tutorials, etc. It has the counter, it has the set counter, it has this effect, and everything just works. It's reactive. Bada bing, bada boom. However, it's actually not. Well, I'm importing create signal and create effect. Yeah, they kind of spoil the fun. It's not called use effect, and it's not called use state. But does it matter? If you can't tell, if the code is like exactly the same, does it matter if you're using React? React shouldn't be put on a pedestal like that. And well, what is this solid.js actually? Well, what if I told you this is basically a synthetic benchmark, that this is called solid.js, and this is here React Redux with hooks, basically what we just spoke this talk. And the geometric mean of slowness is 79% slower for Redux. So, okay, 80%, but it's a synthetic benchmark. Well, actually, not really. It's actually twice as fast than a real world application. So somebody else, not me, did these real world tests and benchmarks where they actually did the same full featureful implementation of a certain web app, and they did it in both packages. And well, Solid is like a lot faster for time to interactive, and it's actually even more even smaller. So it's like 10 times as small. Again, do we really want to do this talk with React and Redux? Maybe it should be called Solid and Redux, maybe just Solid. I don't know, but I'm really trying to be open on these things. And yeah, I want to actually mention a couple of other alternatives as well. I feel like I'm betraying Redux and React at this point, but it's gonna have to happen at some point. We have over here Solid that we already mentioned, and Inferno. Now, the reason why Solid looked familiar to React is because it's JSX based. So if we are writing that HTML inside of JavaScript that everybody talks about, this is gonna be for you. However, Svelte is the new kid on the block. It's been doing fairly well, and something that they share with Solid is that they are both compiled, meaning we're not shipping the actual framework. So if you are having a React app, you ship your React code and then your custom code that it's initialized and using React. So basically, you're always shipping two bundles at least. With Solid and Svelte, this is all compiled or transpiled to pure vanilla, and the place where the framework starts and your custom code begins or ends, it's kind of merged. And given that, also they are not using virtual DOM, they're accessing the DOM directly. So it's like tool sets for writing vanilla code, because at the end, I mean, you could argue that bundled and packaged React is still vanilla in its own way, but this is like miles ahead faster. And I am actually quite excited about the future of front-end development. And yeah, I've been talking a lot about trying to move the status quo, trying to invent things, look at source codes, not be afraid from packages, and maybe contribute something of your own. And I would like to today unveil some some of my tries to do this. It's not sprout, it's never going to be big or anything, but I really wanted to practice what I preach. And I've created this little package. It has a logo, so it must be pretty serious at this point. It's called Use Redux State. From learning about how people use Redux and use state, I've noticed the slide where I spoke about having derived state. That pattern is kind of being replicated here, except in a good way, where we can have a counter and a set counter, but it says use Redux here. It works exactly like use state. You just pass it a path here. This is not the default value. It's actually a path. That's the only difference. And you're getting back your counter value that is going to be changed every time that the state is changed, and also a counter function that already has a dispatch wrapped in. So this here, this piece of code here that is showing the counter and showing set counter is actually completely Redux. It has Redux inside. It's based on Redux. If you have DevTools, you're gonna see a dynamically generated types showing on there. You're gonna see the diffs. You're gonna see everything, and you can have the whole ecosystem of Redux. I don't plan on this being big again. It just I wanted to put something out there, and I wanted to say that if I can do it, you all guys can do it as well, and I encourage you to do so. So please give it a go. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have another glass of water now.
So are we leaving some time for Q&A question? We have one raised hand. I think it's our Marco. Marco, here you go. I think that you can ask your question now.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Great talk for sure. Actually, I'm like Slide said, I'm from Belgrade Hub, and I'm mostly backend, but I was doing React as well. And first, I wanted to say about presentation part where you showed for reducer the way for loading part and all that with prefixes.
Okay.
Definitely something that I never tried before, but it's for sure that I'm going to use in future. And but why I raised the hand? You mentioned Svelte. Yeah, I think it's like that. Yeah, it's, pronounced. I saw it like last year on some conference, Nordic JS, and as I saw, it actually it doesn't have virtual DOM, as understood, but I wanted to ask you, have you tried it? What is the why people now why Svelte is so popular? And it's not so popular, but why is it becoming popular in how does it defines that speed without virtual DOM? Have you tried it?
Yeah, I haven't tried it in production yet. I have tried it on some pet side projects. It's super intuitive to use because it's if you have ever used Vue, I know Vue is big on backend developers because I believe it's really tied to Laravel and PHP, but it really uses the same API as Vue. It has this template sort of thing where you have the script, your styles. Styles are scoped by default, so it has CSS, CJS by default in runtime, and it has your HTML that has some two-directional bindings. And why is it becoming this popular? If you've ever seen the Rich Harris talk, I advise you to watch it if you haven't. But Rich Harris is basically the developer behind Svelte, and he shows that virtual DOM is just a hindrance for us for performance benefits. All these diffings are, first of all, not needed if you can compile things at runtime or at build time, and this kind of opens up new doors to development and different ways to increase performance. I know React has been big on suspense, but suspense has been touted to come out for the past 2 years, and we're still kind of waiting. And I believe it's because the React team has put themselves in this sort of a situation where they are really tied to not breaking or making the same Angular problem mistake that the Angular team did, but at the same time they do want to develop these features. So Svelte is just saw this opening and took it. And Solid is coming like straight third in my opinion. Solid's main selling point is that it's as fast as Svelte. It's actually probably slightly faster and slightly smaller, but it's like a tiny margin. I'm talking 2 to 5%, but still, it's in that range, and it really looks like React. So it's almost a no-brainer at some points that you should probably be using. Of course, the biggest point of React and why people use it is that it has such a big tool set. And we've talked about packages. A lot of the packages are actually React focused. So it really speeds up development. But I believe as any framework in time, it's gonna build its own ecosystem, and some of these are gonna prevail for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Thanks for that. But I think as well that the most important thing is that behind React there is Facebook. Behind Svelte and Solid.js and other that you mentioned, there is no one basically, and always depends on good support behind it because
True.
of production websites, huge steps. I mean, if you make a mistake on some like Svelte or something like that, that has not big support behind it, it can really cost you money, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. However, being that React is backed by Facebook and Angular is backed by Google, Vue isn't backed by anyone, and yet they are like a strong third. The fourth place is like so far behind, and even Vue was the single developer for most of Vue's life. Only recently has a couple of developers started joining the Vue team, so the bus hit factor is no longer one. But I agree on the second point of view, saying that if you have some issues, you're not gonna probably get answers. However, in practice, I find that not to be the case. And you know why? Because these are still small libraries and small frameworks that I'm personally a part of some Discord groups by Rich Harris himself and by Ryan Solid. So if you actually ask those questions, you're not only going to get an answer, you're going to get an answer from the man himself, from the
Yeah,
main developer.
yeah, that's
And I've had that experience, and they are super quick to reply. So they want to encourage you to use their frameworks. So why wouldn't they help you?
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, for asking question. I hope that you got your answer. Again, if anyone else wants to ask something in live, please raise the hand in your participant window. Maria, I'm leaving you to Q&A section. We have a lot of questions there, so please address those and see what you were asked.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. Somebody asked, can you use React refs to avoid re-renders with context? Probably. I honestly haven't tried it. Now that I'm thinking about it, it should probably work. However, why would you reinvent something? If context is built for this thing, and even the React team says, okay, it's not supposed to be a global state, why would you make it so? If there is something that is already battle tested, it has so much work behind it, it has so many edge cases handled, why would you do that? And also using refs means that you're probably gonna bypass some of those React reconcilers. And at that point, why are we even using React, one might argue. So I am slightly biased to just not use context for, because again, I spoke about using the right tool for the right job. If you use context, you live with the consequences. You just have re-renders, and that's fine. You're fine with it. If you are not fine with it, that you probably, in my opinion, want something more serious or specialized for that particular case. So while the answer is probably, the second part is you probably also don't want to do that. Yeah, thank you, Slavica, for removing the question. What is the difference between Redux and React? Okay, cool question. React is actually the framework. It's basically a way to write this JSX code that looks like HTML, and it has built-in reactivity. So when something changes, everything re-renders and you don't have to handle it. And Redux is only the state management part. So Redux is a single source of truth. Um, think of this as a very large object that where you keep the whole state, visual, and cache of your React application, and it's serialized because it's just a big object. It's just a JSON. It's serialized, and every time you want to get into a certain state without having to move throughout all these steps, you can just replicate the state, and that's a very big win for debugging and development purposes. Um, I hope that kind of settles the whole point. What do you think about TypeScript and React? I know TypeScript, I knew it's going to come up. TypeScript is something that I still haven't dabbled in. That's purely situational. But so far, in my personal opinion, most of the bugs are never type related. I know when I speak to this, it's a bit controversial as an opinion. If I were to have to use TypeScript, I would just definitely use it. I believe it definitely gives a bit more structure, and having typed and compile time error checking is gonna be pretty cool. However, for front-end development, I'm slightly biased to say that it's a bit of an overkill. However, if you're using it, you're just not doing anything wrong, and it's probably going to end up being a slightly better code, but like at what cost at the point?
Mario, I want just to step in. We have Anas who raised the hand, so maybe to switch also to that. Also, guys, just for your information, we left 1 hour and a half for this presentation, but as this let's say we have a lot of questions, and as we already mentioned, this is knowledge sharing session, so we definitely encourage you to do that. So we'll maybe just go past the timing we set up, but we want this to go on. So Mario, let's see what Anas wants to ask. Sure. Anas, here you go.
Thank you, Slavica.
No problem.
I'm here. So yeah, actually, I'm a solution architect, and I'm coming from another company, actually Authority Partners. And thank you very much for this kind of presentation. It was really good. Mario, you did a great job. I would actually have 2 questions for you, if that's possible.
Sure.
So since I can really see that you are kind of guy who likes to investigate, and you actually raised this question a couple of times, like what's next, comparing, all of these current frameworks,
Yeah.
Angular, React, and things like that. So I'm just curious about your, think. I don't know if you, had some experience with web assemblies and frameworks like Blazor, which actually are coming on top of the WebAssembly functionality and things like that. So I know it's kind of really weird. So, bringing backend code to the front end, kind of replacing the JavaScript and everything. Uh, I'm just curious about your opinion. Is this something that maybe will have a future?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And WebAssembly, I'm keeping an eye on it. The point is, WebAssembly is we're basically sending faster compiled executables through HTTP to the clients, and it's being understood by the browsers. It's kind of amazing. But JavaScript is going nowhere. I mean, nowhere. It's not going anywhere because we still need HTML, we still need CSS because things need to be semantic until we find a way that that WebAssembly code, if it's utilizing the UI, it's gonna have to be able to help with accessibility, help with screen readers, and we've seen that WebAssembly does none of those things. But there's another view for usage of WebAssembly in these types of applications. Let's say we want to bypass why React is or JavaScript is slow for compiling certain things or doing certain things. We can still keep React, but when we want to do a mathematical or computational thing that's very, very expensive, we can utilize the WebAssembly. So now you're utilizing the whole CPU, you're utilizing some of these backend frameworks and languages that are optimized for speed, but the rest of the UI is still, I believe, in the future going to be handled by JavaScript. So that's my opinion on WebAssembly at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this can be like, replacement for the JavaScript and everything, but it's kind of interesting, and it is actually giving us other point of views, if I would say, and I agree with you on that. And actually, the next question is again maybe somehow related, because for example, in Blazor you have a client side and the server side, and my next question was actually related to the server side rendering. Since you have shown us a couple of pretty cool tools as far as I can see during this presentation, do you have experience with server side rendering with maybe some other tools except Next.js?
Except Next.js, you kind of killed me with that one. Yeah, Next.js is the super familiar choice for us React developers. I'm actually kind of looking into this idea of serverless server-side rendering at the moment, because we know serverless is a thing now, and I'm trying to keep an eye on it as well. And I really thought, like, why is there no frameworks where if I hit a serverless function, it's gonna compile me my front end and give it to me at the for the client. And this can scale because that's what serverless does. I believe the only downside is what downsides are for the serverless functions. However, for server-side generation, Next.js is usually my go-to, and I believe it's slightly overkill for regular web applications. So anything that has authentication system and it's dynamic and it's not really considered about SEO and things like that, you don't probably won't need it, and it's maybe even gonna be slower and harder to scale because everything is now hitting the server. But yeah, it's a must for anything that wants to have a good rank on Google. And serverless is not. It's definitely server-side running is definitely going to be a big thing, especially lately. And I feel like somehow we've gone full circle where we had MVC. We were doing server-side rendering basically, but now we are doing some partial hydration stuff and things like that. So it's still trying to find its own place, I believe, in the architecture world.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I agree with you with this circle. Actually, I don't want to take too much time, but as far as I can see, we are actually going far, far away, and then we are in some moment actually returning to the beginnings. you
Yeah.
know, I don't know. Probably here you have maybe some older developers familiar with things like ASP forms and things like that, the view state object and everything. It's actually pretty similar to the Redux and the central store. It's not so fancy, but like you
Yeah,
said, it actually
goes full
it's
circle.
kind of circle. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you very much for your answers.
Sure. I would actually have two packages that I want you to look at. There's Redwood.js and there is Blitz.js. So they're now currently the underdogs, and they do server-side rendering purely in React, meaning you have a server and you don't have to write your REST APIs. You just use your state and it fetches it from your database. Redwood.js and Blitz.js, just look at them. They're pretty cool and quite new.
Okay, thank you. I will. And maybe one hint for you: there is some sort of AVS service. It's called AWS Amplify, which actually can do some of these, let's say, magic things for us out of the box as well. So you can check that as well.
Nice. I will definitely. Thank you for the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Anas. It was an amazing discussion, actually interesting discussion, but we have 11 more questions. So Mario, I would like to let you to go through them, but please try to wrap that up because we can go that long. And then we are going to our Kahoot quiz to see what we learned from this. So go on.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Use Redux state package is the same as use reducer from React hooks. Well, use reducer is taking the reducer approach of things. It's still it is kind of similar, I agree, but you don't have this to type this reducer. So if you want to edit the counter, you now have to type your reducer to type to have that type, and you have to dispatch it. So it's taking the whole boilerplate kind of thing that Redux kind of has without having Redux. And it's super convenient if you are using use context. You should probably use reducer, but uh, I have a very big README on the GitHub profile for use Redux state, and you might find it interesting. What about Redux form? Redux form is also pretty cool. It actually does what I mentioned before, where Redux, you don't want to be handling it yourself. Forms and Redux, they don't really go together. Well, Redux form is an older package. It's not as fancy as these new packages, but it does get the job work done. And sometimes forms do need to live in the global state. So there's really no reason to not use it if it fits your scope, if it really fixes your problems. Do you try to work with the observable from RxJS? What do you think about it? Maybe to use instead of context. Observable is pretty neat. I know it's big thing in Angular, but it's super convoluted and kind of complex to use. I know it has super flex. If people say Redux Saga is complex, I believe observable is even more. I know it's again super flexible at the same time, but the API is quite daunting at some points. But observable is still using proxies, and there is actually a couple of proxy-based global state solutions out there. So if you were just to Google about proxy state management in React, you're gonna find a lot of different options. One of them, I believe, is called React Easy State. The only downside is it doesn't work without ES6. Um, do you think it's worth it to learn and use TypeScript? Pros and cons. But learning anything is gonna be beneficial. Like I don't see why wouldn't you? You're only gonna enrich in your JavaScript performance. However, cons is of course time. You want to handle everything. You want to try to keep it balanced, but it's never gonna be a bad thing. TypeScript is probably the best for backend, and de facto standard. I wouldn't do backend without TypeScript, but for frontend, you might wanna give your own opinion on these things. Have you ever heard of React Query? Yes, and it's super great. If you don't have this super interactive application and you want to fetch data, have it cached, every time you refocus the window, it recaches everything. It's cache first, basically. Uh, Very nice. I'm keeping an eye on it. And it's also, there's another one from Zeit called Now or something. I don't remember the exact same, but they are quite similar and they do quite well, to be honest, for what they are. React is a library. Yeah, React is a library. It's not a framework. I know. That's why we have this talk, because we have so many options. You can choose 10 different routers and 100 different state machines. Frameworks are going to be opinionated and it's going to be easy, but Redux gives us flexibility. First of all, great presentation, props to you. Thank you very much, Musli. I just want to make a small correction. Redux is developed by Dan Abramov, maintained by him, not directly. Correct. I agree. It is developed by Dan Abramov. He created it back in the day. But he does work in React, so I was partially correct. I was kind of hoping to get by that. Have you ever used GraphQL with React? Not yet, but it brings its own set of problems. From what I've read, like the N+1 problem, and having to recache or cache validation type of thing. So you're kind of replacing some problems with other problems. If you have this super big micro frontend architecture, and like I've been working on a couple of them where I have to hit like 10 different endpoints on REST, GraphQL is going to be a godsend. You just have your query. You don't have to beg your backend developers to add this simple ID to the array or whatever. So yeah, it's a tool that solves certain types of problems. For a lot of them, you're not Facebook. You don't need GraphQL, but yeah, I do think it's quite cool, to be honest. Do we need to use Saga Watcher for every single Saga function, or we can make it easier? I think, yeah, well, theoretically you could be directly calling sagas, the function generators, right, from a middleware, but you still have to listen to it. As far as I know, if you have any other type of approach, let me know. We might figure something quite new that I haven't seen before, and we might even have a super popular package. Marco thought about Redux with Next.js as opposed to GraphQL. Yeah, why not? I mean, you're gonna have to handle some certain edge cases yourself, because GraphQL kind of does that for you. Every time something refreshes, I can just refetch the whole page state, because when you're using GraphQL, your state is your backend. You don't have to keep your state on the front end. So this is gonna make things simpler, but complex at the same time. So sometimes even both. Why not both, right? GraphQL can be for state things, and Redux can be for UI things. You haven't talked much about React's reducer. Any thought about it? I've seen tools for connecting Redux tools with it. Yeah, you can super easily connect to the Redux tools. Actually, any package can just read from the window object and trigger some loggings for the Redux tools. So again, you're reinventing Redux. You're even using Redux tools. You're using use reducer. You're using context. And at which point does that is not called Redux? That's my opinion on it. Again, it's kind of biased, I know, but I really have to have opinions and trying to separate them. So any tips for improving performance on the React app? Yeah, I read a very good article by Can't See Dodds. If you don't know him, he is the creator behind React testing library, and he's basically saying fix your initial slow render before you fix your re-renders, meaning try to cache things, try to optimize things to not have a slow first render, and then you can utilize tools like why did this re-render. That's literally the name of the package. If you search why did this re-render, you're gonna find it on npm. You can install it, and it can hook to this whole lifecycle of re-rendering, because 99% of the problems with React are around re-rendering. That's why we are yearning for suspense in the future. Ooh, that was a fast approach to all of those questions. I hope.
No, Mario, you were amazing. I can say from my point of view that it's fascinating how much you deep dived in the topic, and how much you are researched about this, and your knowledge is amazing. So big thank to you. We had a few more comments in the chat box, but unfortunately, guys, I think that we don't have enough time to answer those or to relate to those, but we saw them. You can maybe approach Mario and after this and talk more about the topic. Now we will go to our Kahoot quiz. I'm really glad that you had a lot of questions and that we deep dived into this conversation and discussion, but let's have some fun and win some amazing prizes. Mario, once again, thank you. You were amazing tonight.
Thanks, everybody. Those are great questions, by the way. They were super wide approach, and I hope my slightly biased personal opinions, are of any worth to you guys.
Thank you, Mario. Marian, I'm just leaving you the part about explaining what guys will get, and then we can start with our Kahoot quiz.
Yes, Mario, once again, thank you very much, and also for sharing the spirit of our internal knowledge sharing and for facilitating this discussion. As Slavica has mentioned, we are now trying to wrap it up with some of the key points that Mario has shared. So we're inviting you to join our quiz. You're looking at the screen. Slavki, back to you about the rules. People are already jumping in, so you know the drill.
Yeah, guys, I just wanted to let you know, I know that you are already applying, but please enter your full name, because, or if you already applied, write it down in the chat box. So your nickname and the full name, so it's easier for us to find you and contact you after the event. That's really important, even though you can also add your initials for the city you are from, because sometimes we have same full name and the city is the important part. So please use your full name and the city at the end.
Yes, and we didn't have mentioned it's a tradition for all our quizzes. We have also prepared some interesting prizes, so some really cool GBL speakers, some wireless chargers, and some really cool backpack from Symphony is waiting for the best of you tonight. Slavki, what do you think? We're 25 now.
I'm looking to go to 60. So let's see what will happen. Once again, guys, use your full name. It will help us if you win to find you easier. So let's go to 50 or 60.
Following the discussion that we just heard, maybe we should be more ambitious, but let's see.
Let's see.
The number is rising, so we'll wait a little bit more. Mario, you're not joining the quiz?
I mean, I could, but I will have to take all of your prizes. I don't think that's fair.
We have an issue where Alexander Benchun said that we have a length limit. We didn't know that. Good to know for our following events. But as our colleague Dalila said, you can use Alex Benchun. Definitely now we will recognize you. Okay, we are at 46. Can we have 5 more?
Yes, 5 more and we are starting. Slav, you only needed to ask, that's it. Last one. Come on, one more. Welcome, Stankovic. Okay, we are going.
Okay, let's start with the first question. So what's the latest ASCMA script version at the moment? You have 15 seconds to answer. You can use shapes on your screen to answer the correct question if that is confusing you. So that's it. We have 30 correct answers. We got, let's see who is on the first place. Who was the fastest one? Amel Karsic from Sarajevo is on the first. Igor Njagojevic is the second, and Amar Jarasharevic is the third. Let's see what will happen next. How many packages did NPM reach in June 2019? Oh, you are fast. 47 answers. Ooh, you are at 50 answers. So basically 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what the scale says. Oh, Igor is now on the first place, Alexander is on the second, and Stefan is on the third place. Let's see what's next. How many downloads per week does the package is number have? Yes. Again, 15 more seconds. I like how fast you are, guys. It's amazing. In like 5 seconds, you're already answered. So good job. Okay, 23 correct answers. Okay, so our scale is changing like fastly. Adnan Gobelic is at the first place, Almina Haskic is the second, and Arakanovic is on the third place. Let's see what's next. What is the Mimoist selector package name? Pre-select, reselect, deselect, unselect. Again, you're fast, guys. 49 answers in 5 seconds. Okay, 42 correct answers. Good job. Let's see if the scale changed. Adnan Kobelic is still on the first place. Igor Njagojevic is on the second, and Akanovic is on the third place. Let's see if something will change. What is the name of the Redux architecture pattern? Flux, reflux, redux, reflow. Do you remember this, Marian, maybe?
Of course I do.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see how you answered this one. Oh, so this was like half-half, 21 correct answer. Igor is on the first place, and Adnan Gobelic is on the second, and Alkanovic is on the third. So they are switching positions from question to question. So this is 6 of our 7th question. What is the website name for getting min-zipped files of a package? Oh, I remember this one. Do you remember, guys?
Remind you of something else, Lofty?
Let's not talk about that. Okay, let's see. This one was tough for you. I see 23 correct questions. Igor Njagojevic, he's on the first place. Okanovic stepped up on the second, and we have another one. I don't know who is this. ZenQ92. Please write down in our chat box for your full name so we recognize you. Let's go to our last question, Marianne. What is the name of the package Mario unveiled? Use context hooks, use Redux hooks, use Redux easy, use Redux state. Is this the tough one for you? Let's see how you answered.
remember the logo though. It was cool.
Yeah.
Oh, this one was great. 35 correct answers. Let's see who are the winners. So at the third place is Adnan Gobelic. Woo, Adnan. Okanovic is on the second place. And the first one is Igor. Congratulations, guys. So please, I think that I know who are those people, but please write down your full names in our chat box, just not to miss anything. Thank you, guys. I see that you paid a lot of attention to our presentation, Mario's presentation. And thank you for staying with us. We maybe past the time predicted for this, but I like that we have our knowledge sharing discussion and that you had a lot of questions for Mario. Please remember that we will send you the recording and the presentation after this in the follow-up, and I will leave the stage to Marian to wrap up this.
Many thanks, first of all, to Mario for engaging presentation and always interesting insights. Many thanks for all of you for joining us. Of course, as always, feel free to check out everything that's happening within Symfony, all the open positions throughout our development hubs. Also follow us on our social media and check also all the fun insights that are happening within our community. Many thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next meetup.
Thank you once again, Mario, and thank you, Marian, for being my host with me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Mario, as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.